Elias Ward had been awake since before dawn, the cold biting through his coat as he stepped out onto the frost-covered prairie. His horse, Thunder, neighed softly, stamping its hooves in impatience. The ranch had been quiet for weeks, quiet enough that even the usual whispers of the wind felt different, as if the land itself were holding its breath. But this morning, something unusual caught his eye near the edge of the corral. There, huddled beside Thunder, was a young woman. She was small and fragile-looking, wrapped in a tattered shawl, her dark hair tangled and matted with dew. Her face was pressed to the cold ground, lips parted slightly, and for a moment Elias thought she might be dead. Then, faintly, he heard her whisper. The sound was so soft that he could have imagined it, but the word froze him in place. Marina. Marina had been his late wife, taken from him suddenly the year before. The memory of her gentle hands, her laughter at breakfast, the way she would hum while mending clothes, all of it came rushing back in a painful wave. And now this stranger, this unknown widow, was uttering her name as if she were calling to someone who might still answer. Elias took a cautious step closer, hands hovering over the rifle strapped to his back. He needed to know if this was some cruel trick of his mind or a sign of something far stranger. The woman stirred, blinking against the rising sun, and opened her eyes. They were dark and wide, filled with exhaustion and fear. She seemed startled at seeing him, but there was no malice, only vulnerability. "You? Who are you?" Elias's voice was rough, but he forced calm into it. The woman sat up slowly, shivering. I didn't mean to startle your horse," she said, her voice hoarse from sleep. I'm sorry, I didn't know where else to go." She glanced at the horizon, as though expecting someone to appear out of the morning mist. Elias frowned, eyeing her carefully. She carried nothing but a small bundle wrapped in cloth. No weapons, no papers, nothing to explain why she was here alone in the dead of night on his land. "And your husband?" he asked gently, though his chest tightened at the thought of asking the wrong question. She swallowed hard. "Dead. I had no choice. I couldn't stay." Her words trembled, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her thin frame. Elias's gaze flicked back to Thunder. The horse nuzzled her hand, and she flinched, as if unused to kindness. "You can't stay here," he said slowly. "But you won't get far in this weather alone." The woman looked up at him, eyes glistening. I'm not. I don't know why Her voice faltered, and she whispered again, almost to herself, "Marina." The sound hit Elias like a physical blow. He stepped closer, heart hammering. "You know that name?" His voice was sharper now, a mix of disbelief and curiosity. She shook her head quickly, as though trying to shake away the memory. I don't know why I said that. I heard it in my dreams." Elias studied her. Everything about this moment, the cold, the quiet prairie, the whisper of Marina's name felt like the beginning of something that could not be explained by simple chance. And yet, there she was, a stranger, a widow, lying beside his horse as if the universe had placed her there intentionally. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "All right," he said finally. "You can't stay out here. Come with me. I'll give you something warm, at least until you figure out where you're going." The woman hesitated, then nodded. And as she rose to follow him, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter, strange and impossible as it seemed, was only the first of many that would challenge everything he thought he knew about loss, fate, and the whispers of the past. Elias led the young woman up the narrow path to his cabin, the frost crunching under their boots. The morning sun was beginning to pierce the horizon, painting the prairie in pale gold, but the warmth did little to thaw the chill that had settled in his chest. He kept glancing at her, noting the tremor in her hands, the exhaustion in her posture. She was fragile, yet there was something in the way she held herself, quiet resilience that suggested she had survived more than her young face should reveal. Inside the cabin, Ilias set a kettle over the stove and gestured toward the small cot by the wall. "Sit," he said. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." She obeyed, her movements careful and hesitant, as if every step required thought. "I'm Lydia," she said quietly. "Lydia Hayes." She avoided his gaze, staring down at her hands folded in her lap. Elias nodded. "Elias Ward. This is my home, not a hotel. You can rest, but you'll have to tell me why you were out there, sleeping beside thunder." He paused, studying her expression. "And how you know my wife's name?" Lydia's lips parted, but she said nothing at first. Her eyes darted to the kettle as if hoping its boiling would somehow offer an answer. Finally, she whispered, I don't know why I said it. Marena, that name. It came to me in a dream. I heard it like a voice calling for someone. I wasn't thinking. I was just lost." Elias frowned. "Dreams don't usually call out the names of people we've never met." "I don't know how to explain it," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I lost my husband not long ago. His family. They tried to take everything from me after he died. I had no choice but to leave. I've been moving from town to town, from farm to farm, trying to survive. I didn't know where I'd sleep last night. Her voice broke, and she lowered her eyes, biting her lip to keep from crying. Elias felt a pang of sympathy, but also a tightening of something deeper inside him. The similarities, the whispered name, the dreams, the sense of being guided were uncanny. And yet here she was, a stranger who had somehow found her way to his land, to his horse, in the dead of night. Fate, he thought grimly, had a strange sense of humor. He poured water from the kettle into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink, you'll need it." She took it with shaking hands and sipped, the warmth bringing color back to her pale cheeks. "Why did you keep going?" Elias asked after a moment. "You could have asked for help, gone to a town, a church. Anything." She shook her head. "I couldn't, not there. People don't help widows like me. They look for weaknesses, opportunities. I was afraid, Mr. Ward, afraid they'd find me, take what little I had left." Her gaze finally met his. There was honesty in it, raw and unshielded. "I didn't know where else to go. And then I saw your horse. He's so calm, so steady. I thought maybe I'd be safe with him." Elias softened, though he didn't let his expression betray too much. Thunder had always been more than a horse to him. He was a companion, a protector. And now he seemed to have chosen her, nudging her gently as if offering reassurance. "Safe, maybe," he said slowly. "But that's not the same as home. And you can't stay out there forever. You'll freeze, or worse, someone might find you before I do." Lydia swallowed. I don't know how to thank you." Elias shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. We're just getting started. You're safe for now, but this land, this house, it's not the end of your troubles." She nodded, understanding the gravity behind his words. And as they sat in the quiet warmth of the cabin, the first hints of dawn spilling across the floor, both of them felt it, the strange, unspoken connection that had drawn her to his doorstep, and the unexplainable echo of a name that had bridged the gap between past and present, Marena. The days that followed Lydia's arrival were filled with a tense rhythm. Elias tried to focus on routine feeding the horses, mending fences, checking the traps along the creek, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the young widow who now shared his cabin. There was something uncanny about her, something that made the familiar walls of his home feel charged with memories of his late wife. It started subtly. One evening, while Lydia was helping him clean the kitchen, she hummed a soft tune. It was delicate, almost childlike, yet entirely familiar. Elias froze mid-motion, the rag in his hand stiffening as recognition surged through him. It was the same lullaby Marina had sung to their neighbors' children, a song that had lulled him to sleep countless nights. He couldn't explain why, but hearing it from Lydia's lips felt like a mirror of the past, like Marina's voice had returned in someone else. Where did you learn that? He asked carefully, keeping his tone neutral but laced with curiosity. Lydia paused, glancing at him with an uneasy expression. It's from my grandmother. She used to sing it to me when I was little. Her voice wavered, unsure. I didn't mean anything by it. I remembered it. Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. Marina sang it too. To me, years ago. Only Marina. Lydia's eyes widened, the color draining from her face. She shook her head quickly. I don't know why it sounds the same. It's a coincidence, I suppose. But Elias couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't coincidence. And the oddities didn't stop there. The next day, while tending the horses, Lydia began describing a method of grooming that Marina had once perfected, a technique Elias had never shared with anyone, not even his closest friends. And yet Lydia spoke of it with ease, as though she had observed Marina herself. One afternoon, as Elias prepared the evening meal, Lydia paused by the stove, her gaze distant. You know, she murmured, almost to herself, Marina always added a pinch of sage to the stew. It made it taste like home. Elias's hand froze over the knife. You know that too? He asked, voice tight. Lydia blinked, startled. I remember it from her. From her recipes, my grandmother wrote them down. I don't know why, but they were there. That night, Elias lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his cabin. He felt a disquiet he could not name. Every coincidence, the lullaby, the recipes, the grooming techniques pressed against his mind like the wind against the prairie door. He wanted to believe it was chance, that the universe had conspired to bring him a widow who shared uncanny similarities with the woman he had loved and lost. But the more he tried to dismiss it, the more the evidence piled up, until it felt less like coincidence and more like something deliberate, something beyond understanding. Meanwhile, Lydia struggled with her own unease. She had never met Marina, yet everywhere she turned in Elias's life, she saw traces of the woman she had only glimpsed in dreams. It unsettled her, made her question her own memories and dreams. And yet, despite the discomfort, there was a strange comfort in being here, in this cabin, on this land. Beside this man who seemed both wary and protective. Elias finally resolved that some things could not be ignored. There were questions that demanded answers, mysteries that had to be confronted. And as he watched Lydia move about the cabin, her gestures, her expressions so much like Marina's, he realized he was standing at a crossroads. He could retreat into grief and suspicion, or he could face the impossible truth that this widow, in ways he did not yet understand, was tied to the memory of the woman he had lost. By the time the fire in the hearth had died down, the shadows in the cabin seemed to stretch and bend, carrying with them the whispers of the past. And in that quiet, Elias whispered to himself, a mixture of fear and hope curling in his chest. How is this possible? The answer, whatever it was, had yet to reveal itself, but one thing was certain. Lydia was no ordinary woman, and the name Marina was no longer just a memory. It had returned, haunting and guiding, demanding attention. The next morning, a pale sun stretched its fingers across the prairie, brushing frost from the cabin roof. Elias had barely slept, his mind restless with questions about Lydia and the strange, unshakable echoes of his late wife. He found himself watching her as she moved about the cabin, how she carried herself, how she touched the things she passed. As if some invisible thread connected her to the life he had lost. It was during breakfast that the first undeniable sign appeared. Lydia reached for a tin cup on the table, and as she lifted her sleeve to pour water, a pale, crescent-shaped birthmark caught Elias's eye. His heart tuttered. It was identical to Marina's. He froze mid-breath, staring as if the mark could reveal some hidden truth. The crescent had been a unique, unmistakable feature of Marina's, known only to him and a few others who had been close to her. Lydia's mark was exactly the same, in the exact same location on her wrist. Elias cleared his throat, his voice tight with disbelief. That mark. Where did you get it? Lydia looked down, frowning, as if noticing it for the first time. I've had it my whole life, she said softly. It's a birthmark. Always has been. Elias's fingers itched to reach out, to trace the familiar crescent, but he restrained himself. This can't be a coincidence, he said, more to himself than to her. Marina had the same mark. Lydia's eyes widened. Your wife? She asked, sensing the intensity in his tone. You mean Marina? She hesitated. I don't know what to say. I've never seen her, never even met her. I can't explain it. Elias ran a hand through his hair, frustration and confusion battling within him. It's not just the mark. It's the name, the lullaby, the way you know things. Things only Marina knew. How is this possible? Lydia shook her head, the fear in her eyes mirrored in his own. I don't know, she admitted. I've had dreams. Strange dreams. Sometimes I wake up calling a name I don't even understand. Maybe it's her. Maybe I'm somehow connected. Elias studied her, searching for any hint of deception, but all he found was sincerity and exhaustion. Her past had been harsh. It was clear she had survived violence and loss, but this mark, this echo of Marina, it defied logic. You're telling me. You've been walking through life with a mark identical to hers. And dreams that call her name? Elias's voice was rough, almost a whisper. And you have no idea why? I've never understood it, Lydia said, her voice trembling. I thought they were just dreams, memories that didn't belong to me. I never knew why I always felt drawn to certain places, certain people. Until now? Elias felt a strange chill settle over him. For a moment, he considered that the world had shifted, that the boundary between past and present had blurred in ways he could not yet comprehend. The mark was tangible, undeniable, a proof of something larger, something that no explanation could contain. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Lydia, if what you say is true, if all of this isn't just coincidence, then there's more to your story than even you realize. And I think it has something to do with Marina. Lydia's eyes filled with both fear and hope. Do you think she? Elias shook his head slowly, staring at her wrist. I don't know yet. But whatever this is, it brought you here. And it's not finished with us. Not by a long shot. The silence in the cabin stretched, heavy with unspoken questions and fragile understanding. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grass as if carrying messages from the past. And inside, two lives bound by fate, mystery, and a crescent-shaped mark stood at the threshold of a story that would change everything they believed about love, loss, and destiny. The days that followed Lydia's stay were tense, each one carrying an undercurrent of unease. Elias had tried to return to routine, tending the land and horses as he always had, but the presence of Lydia and the eerie connections to his late wife had made the familiar feel foreign. He kept a watchful eye, never leaving her alone near the cabin or the corral. Thunder, too, seemed alert, his ears swiveling at the slightest sound beyond the fences. It was late afternoon when the first threat arrived. Elias noticed unusual tracks in the soft earth near the creek, a series of heavy boots, too large to belong to anyone in the nearby town, moving deliberately toward the ranch. His instincts, honed by years on the prairie, sent a chill down his spine. He signaled Lydia to stay inside and grabbed his rifle. Moments later, two men appeared at the edge of the property. One was tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes as cold as iron. The other smaller, wiry, but equally menacing. Elias recognized them immediately from Lydia's story, her late husband's brother and a hired hand, tracking her down after all these months. "Step aside." "Ward," the taller man called, his voice carrying across the empty prairie. "We're here for the girl. Hand her over, and we'll leave without trouble." Elias tightened his grip on the rifle, his jaw set. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said. "You'll have to go through me first." The smaller man smirked. "Bold words. Don't forget who's really armed here." Elias's eyes flicked to Thunder, who stamped his hooves, low and warning. He knew the horse would follow his lead protective as any man. But this wasn't about animals. This was about human greed and violence. And Elias's heart thundered in his chest. "Lydia," he whispered, glancing back toward the cabin. "Stay inside. Don't come out." She nodded, pale but steady, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. Her presence was enough to ignite his protective instincts, and he felt the weight of every past failure and loss press against him. The confrontation escalated quickly. The smaller man lunged, aiming for Elias with a knife, but Thunder charged from the corral, hooves striking, ears flattened, forcing the intruder back. The taller man drew a revolver, but Elias was faster, his rifle raised. A single warning shot cut through the crisp air, sending the men stumbling back, reconsidering their approach. "Leave now," Elias shouted, voice echoing over the plains. "And don't come back." For a tense moment, the men hesitated, glaring at him with fury. Then, as if realizing they were outmatched on the open land, they retreated, slipping back into the shadows near the tree line. Elias didn't relax until he watched them disappear completely. Leaving only their footprints in the mud. When he returned to the cabin, Lydia was waiting, trembling but unharmed. You fought them off," she said softly, her eyes wide with awe and gratitude. Elias lowered his rifle and exhaled, muscles taut from tension. "This land isn't safe for the faint of heart," he said. "And neither are people who prey on the weak. You're lucky you made it here. Luck. And maybe something else." Lydia met his gaze, sensing the unspoken connection in his words. Do you really think it's fate?" Elias shook his head, though a thought lingered at the edge of his mind. The whispers of Marina, the dreams. The mark had they all led Lydia here not just for protection, but for something beyond his understanding? "That doesn't matter," he said finally. "Right now you're safe. And I'm not going to let anyone take that away from you. Not ever." As the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the prairie, Elias realized that the danger was only the beginning. Lydia's past had followed her here, but so had something else, something tied to the memory of Marina. Something that might change the course of both their lives. And as they sat in the cabin, the evening wind rattling the shutters, Elias silently vowed to protect her, not just from the threats outside, but from the mysteries that lingered in the spaces between dreams and reality. The fire in the cabin had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. Outside, the prairie was silent except for the distant howl of a coyote and the whisper of the wind through the tall grasses. Elias sat in his chair, his rifle leaning against the wall, listening for any sign of the men who had come seeking Lydia, but the night was calm, almost unnaturally so, and his attention kept drifting back to the young widow sleeping in the small cot nearby. Lydia's breathing was uneven, as if she were caught between dreams and wakefulness. Elias had noticed it before. Her sleep seemed restless, troubled, yet purposeful, as though she were carrying messages in the quiet of the night. He watched her, a knot of unease tightening in his chest. Something about her sleep had always reminded him of Marina, but tonight it felt different. A soft murmur broke the stillness. Elias leaned forward, straining to hear. Lydia's lips moved, forming words he could barely catch. Then, clear and unmistakable, came the whisper, "Elias, don't forget me." His breath caught in his throat. The voice was impossibly familiar. It was Marina's, the words she had spoken on her deathbed, words he had thought were lost forever, now drifted from the lips of this stranger, this Lydia. He stepped closer, unsure whether to wake her or remain hidden. Her eyes fluttered beneath her eyelids, but she did not awaken. She continued, whispering phrases he remembered from long ago, words of love, of warning, of trust, spoken in Marina's gentle tone. Each one sent a shiver down his spine. Elias. Protect her. Protect her from the darkness. Elias's heart pounded. He had always loved Marina, but now he was faced with something he could not rationalize. Was this the work of fate? Of some lingering spirit? Or was Lydia somehow channeling memories she could not possibly know? He knelt beside her cot, trying to remain calm. "Lydia," he murmured softly, "wake up. It's me. You're safe." Her eyes blinked open, confused, and she stared at him as if seeing the room for the first time. I was dreaming," she said, her voice trembling. I heard her. Marina. I don't understand. I've never met her." And yet, Elias shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "You called her name in your sleep. You whispered things she said to me. Before she died." "How? Why?" Lydia's hands trembled as she clutched the blanket. I've had dreams like this for as long as I can remember. Sometimes I wake up crying, sometimes whispering. Names I don't recognize, words I don't understand. I thought they were just dreams, fragments of something I've imagined." Elias studied her, his skepticism battling with the undeniable truth before him. Every detail, the mark on her wrist, the lullabies, the recipes, and now these whispered words suggested that she was more than just a survivor of hardship. She was connected to Marina in ways he could not begin to explain. "Lydia," he said slowly, kneeling closer, "you didn't just arrive here by accident. Something, or someone, brought you to this place. I don't know why, but I do know this. You're here for a reason. And whatever it is, we're going to figure it out together." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Do you believe me?" Elias exhaled, the weight of grief, fear, and hope pressing on him. "I don't know what I believe anymore," he admitted. "But I do know this. I trust you. And I won't let anything harm you. Not the men who came for you, and not whatever, or whoever, is guiding us now." The cabin fell into silence again, but it was no longer quiet. It was alive with the echoes of the past whispers that threaded through the night, connecting the living and the dead, the remembered and the forgotten. Elias realized that Lydia was no longer just a guest or a survivor. She was a vessel for memory, a bridge to the woman he had loved, and perhaps a guide to the path destiny had chosen for them both. Outside, the wind carried a soft murmur across the prairie. Inside, the fire crackled, and in the small, fragile figure sleeping beside him, Elias felt both hope and fear intertwine a promise that the past was not done with them yet. The prairie was bathed in the golden haze of late afternoon when Elias first spotted the distant dust cloud rolling toward the ranch. His heart tightened in his chest. The tracks he had found earlier were only a warning the threat had returned, and this time it was closer, louder, and far more dangerous. "Lydia," he called quietly, his voice low but firm. "Get inside. Now?" She nodded immediately, a spark of fear and determination in her eyes. The cabin's door closed behind her, but the sound of hurried boots and shouting carried across the open land. Elias loaded his rifle, muscles coiled like springs, and positioned himself near the corral where Thunder waited. The horse snorted, ears pinned back, ready to defend its master and the woman who had become their shared charge. The attackers emerged from the tree line, a small group this time, led by her late husband's brother. Their faces were twisted with anger and entitlement, the kind of rage that comes from believing the world owes you everything. They were armed, reckless, and convinced of their advantage. "You can't hide her forever, Ward," the leader shouted. "Hand her over, and we'll leave. Refuse, and we take what's ours by force." Elias didn't hesitate. "She's not yours," he barked, "and I won't let you touch her." The smaller men rushed forward, and chaos erupted. Elias fired warning shots into the air, but the intruders pressed on, determined. Thunder charged from the corral, hooves pounding the earth, scattering two of the men and forcing the others to retreat momentarily. The sound of gunfire and shouting echoed across the prairie, sending birds and small animals fleeing into the skies. In the midst of the chaos, Lydia did something Elias had not expected. Rather than hiding, she grabbed a nearby shovel and ran toward a man attempting to circle behind him. Her movements were swift, precise, fueled by fear and resolve. She struck him across the arm, forcing him back with a sharp cry. Elias's eyes widened. The young widow who had seemed so fragile days before was now a force to be reckoned with. Elias fought alongside her, but a sharp pain tore through his side. A bullet grazed him. He stumbled, gritting his teeth against the pain. Lydia immediately came to his aid, steadying him, and whispered almost instinctively, "Marina would have told me to stay strong. We can do this." Her words, the invocation of his late wife's name, sent a jolt of clarity through him. This wasn't just survival. This was destiny in motion. Somehow, Marina's memory, her guidance, had found a conduit in Lydia. Elias straightened, drawing upon every ounce of strength he had, and together they forced the attackers to retreat. By the time the dust settled, the men had fled, leaving deep impressions in the earth as proof of their intrusion. Elias was bruised, sore, and bleeding, but alive. Lydia stood beside him, her hands trembling but steady, eyes bright with adrenaline and determination. You did it," Elias said, disbelief and awe mixing in his voice. "You fought them off." She nodded, catching her breath. We did it, together." Elias's gaze fell on Thunder, snorting and pawing at the ground. And then back to Lydia. He realized something profound. This young widow, this woman who had appeared beside his horse in the early morning, was no ordinary survivor. She carried courage, resourcefulness, and something else, a connection to the past he couldn't explain. To a woman he had loved and lost. Sitting down heavily against the cabin wall, Elias allowed himself a moment to breathe. The threat had passed, but the realization settled like a stone in his chest. Lydia wasn't just a stranger. She was part of a story that stretched beyond the boundaries of time and reason. She had arrived at his doorstep for a purpose, and together, they were only beginning to uncover what it was. Outside, the prairie returned to silence, broken only by the occasional distant cry of a hawk. Inside, Elias and Lydia sat together, bruised, shaken, yet united. The night would bring rest, but the bond forged in battle and in the whispers of the past would not easily be broken. The prairie was quiet the morning after the attack. a soft wind stirring the tall grass as if brushing away the remnants of the chaos from the day before. The sun rose slowly, painting the horizon with shades of gold and rose. Inside the cabin, Elias and Lydia moved cautiously, each aware of the lingering tension, yet drawn together by the shared trials of the previous day. Elias cleaned his sidearm while Lydia tended to the minor scrapes and bruises he had sustained. Her touch was gentle, careful, yet it carried a strength he had come to rely on. As she bandaged a shallow cut on his arm, she whispered, almost involuntarily, "Marina would have wanted us to survive this." The name sent a shiver down Elias's spine, not from grief, but from recognition. It was as if Marina herself were there, guiding them, offering reassurance that their struggles had meaning. He looked into Lydia's eyes and saw a reflection of hope, courage, and something deeper, something that spoke to the woman he had loved and the future he had thought impossible. "Lydia," he said slowly, his voice steady, though layered with emotion, "I don't know how to explain any of this. How everything has fallen into place. But I know one thing. You're safe here, and I want you to stay." She paused, meeting his gaze, the weight of her experiences, fears, and losses apparent. "Elias, I've been running for so long," she admitted softly. "I never imagined I'd find a place or someone who makes me feel at home." His hand brushed hers, tentative, seeking permission and connection. "Home doesn't have to be a place, Lydia. Sometimes it's a person. Sometimes it's a second chance." For the first time, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. The past Marina, her husband, the fear and flight, was still present, lingering like shadows at the edge of their lives. But for the first time since she had fled, she felt a sense of belonging. A feeling of safety that was more than physical. Elias stood, walking to the window to gaze out at the land. Thunder neighed softly from the corral, nudging the gate as if urging him to look beyond the immediate safety and toward the possibilities of the future. Elias exhaled deeply, a sense of resolve settling over him. "Whatever brought you here," he said, glancing back at Lydia, "whatever forces or coincidences guided us together, I don't need to understand it all. I just need to know that you're here and that we face what comes next together." She stepped closer, the warmth of her presence filling the room. "I don't know what the future holds," Lydia admitted, "but I do know that being here, with you, it feels right." Elias smiled, a rare, unburdened expression that he had not worn since Marina's passing. "Then we start anew," he said, taking her hand. "Not as a replacement for the past, but as something new, something worth protecting, something blessed by what came before us." The wind outside carried a soft whisper through the prairie, gentle and almost musical. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, listening. He imagined it was Marina's voice, a blessing, a confirmation that Lydia's presence was not an end to memory but a continuation, a bridge between love lost and love reborn. Lydia leaned into him, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked softly, referring to Marina. Elias nodded, feeling the familiar ache of loss, yet softened by the acceptance of this new beginning. "Every day," he admitted. "But I also believe she brought you here, not to replace her, but to save both of us. Maybe to remind me that life doesn't end with loss. Sometimes it begins again in unexpected ways." Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, sun-drenched and serene. Inside, two lives, intertwined by fate, past, and courage, settled into a fragile but undeniable harmony. The shadows of the past had not disappeared, they never would, but they no longer haunted. They guided. Elias and Lydia stood side by side, hands intertwined, hearts cautiously opening to the promise of a future neither had dared to imagine. And as the morning light spilled across the cabin floor, the name Marina lingered, not as a whisper of sorrow, but as a benediction, sealing a beginning born from both memory and hope.